My friend texted me late at night, asking if I wanted to go on a road trip. It was a Friday night, I had nothing going on, so I figured, why not? I think we all have that one friend. Whenever we're with that person, something crazy happens. Well, she was that one friend. I should have known something crazy was gonna pop off, but I didn't think we'd end up in a situation as crazy as this one. Well, we drove 2 towns down from where we lived, and she pulls over and tells me that she didn't really want to go on a road trip. But she did meet some guy online and wanted someone to be with her when she met him in person for the first time. Why me? I don't fucking know. But she did reassure me that everything would be fine, and oh, this guy she was gonna meet had a friend for me, you know, the cherry on top, just what I wanted. Not. So we pull up to this guy's house. My friend knocks on his door, and some old dude answers, and apparently it was the guy she was chatting to online. Her face said the opposite, but whatever. We go into this man's house, when we should have just ran the fuck away. His house smelled really bad, like cigarettes, and my friend and I sat down on his couch, really close. His friend was super drunk and shoving an alcohol bottle in my face, trying to get me to drink with him, but I wasn't having it. He never gave up either. Both him and the guy my friend was meeting both tried to get us to smoke and drink, but we just wanted to leave. We stuck around for a little bit. It was awkward as hell. But then when my friend and I got up to head out, the guy locked his door and wouldn't let us leave. These 2 grown-ass men were rubbing their bodies all over us and shoving alcohol in our faces, and the friend blew smoke right in my face thinking it was funny, and one of the guys turned porn on the TV. What I thought was funny at first, hoping my friend would learn some type of lesson, turned very scary and not funny at all. I felt trapped. I thought I was going to get raped with the way these men were acting. Luckily, they let us leave, but they weren't nice about it. The ride home was super awkward. The friend that got me involved with that put me in a lot of harmful situations, so I cut her off real quick.
This happened about 7 years ago, I would say. I was a pretty big drug addict at the time and was around 18 years old. I was a baby-faced skinny guy, which will make sense later in this story. I was going to see a weed dealer with my best friend at the time in the afternoon, and we were waiting near a bottle shop to pick up from him. He came down, handed it to us, and a man, Bob, came up to us and spoke to my dealer and invited us to his place to have a few drinks and smoke a couple bongs. We weren't going to turn that down, so we walked up to his place. It was a dingy old place, and we soon realized that Bob was the actual dealer, and our dealer was just the middleman cutting out some weed for his efforts to hook us up. Bob was overly friendly sort of guy, maybe late 40s, and was extremely touchy-feely with our dealer. Our dealer was around our age. I didn't think much of it since I was getting free drinks and had a place to smoke at, rather than some park we would have to find. So we go back to Bob's a few days later for cones and beers, and he offered me a glass of orange juice. I accepted and hear him crushing up something in the kitchen, and he came back with some juice. It had some floating white specks in it. I was all for getting high, so I didn't even question it and drank it. About 3 hours later, Bob says to me, "How are you still up? I put enough bars of Xanax in there to put anyone out." I laughed and said, "Well, not enough apparently. Why didn't you tell me anyway? Are you trying to rape me?" He just smiled and changed the subject. Later that night, this guy comes from another room in the house and introduces himself as John. John's a flamboyant gay, which first says to the 4 or so of us young guys there, "So who can I pay to get a blowjob around here?" Some of the guys I was with seemed to have met him before and just laughed him off and told him to get fucked in a joking way. A few weeks of going there, and I started to notice that Bob was getting really touchy with me when he was drunk. It got so bad that sometimes he would forcefully hold me down for no reason. I got freaked out, and he would apologize. He was a terrible alcoholic and would be fucked up on drugs all the time. I started to live there for a while on and off because I was homeless and just a fucking mess. The touchy-feeling shit never went away, and he would always try to drug me non-stop. One day, I did fall asleep, so he must have snuck some drugs somewhere. I did have another friend there at the time, and I knew he did as well. I got fucking scared when I woke up, but it seemed to be okay. One day, Bob tells me that his computer is fucked and won't run properly. Me being the computer geek, I tell him I can fix it. It was covered with malware and adware, but what I found on it haunted me still to this day. Child porn everywhere. He didn't even try to hide it. Some were of people at the house, and even of him naked with John. I saw it and closed it all quickly and pretended I didn't see. I ran an antivirus tool and got rid of most of it, I think, but I wasn't really focused on that now. I kept drinking my beer and was wondering what the fuck I have gotten myself into. It all made sense. We knew he was a seedy bastard, but this was a lot more than I was expecting. I cut ties with him and thought about calling the police, but was speaking to my friends about it, and they said, well, he sells the best weed. And they would come up with all sorts of bullshit excuses not to. Years passed, and I got desperate for some weed, so I called him up to buy some. He was happy to hear my voice again, and invited me over. I told him I wouldn't stay on the phone, and he said that was fine. I knock on the door, and he opens up the door, and there was at least 5 young kids there, around the table with beers in front of them, and he smiled at me and said, I missed you. I got my bag and got the fuck out of there. I wish I told the kids to get the fuck out of there. I wish I called the cops. I never spoke to him or heard from him again. He had this huge lump on his elbow, which looked like a tumor, and he didn't want to go to the doctor to get it checked out, so he may be dead by now. There's a huge amount to this story, but I just tried to keep it as short as possible, as it's huge already. Just one of the fucked up life experiences I have had. Trust your gut, it could save other people in the future.
When I just finished college, I was living in a 1-bedroom townhouse split. I met a guy on Plenty of Fish, and at that time I wasn't exactly smart about my online digital footprint. Not that I've really changed, but at least now I'm not as ridiculous. Anyways, he seemed like a decent guy, and he was really good looking. Said he had a good job, nice teeth, don't judge me, and looked like he cared about his personal health. All things I would typically look for in a guy. I'm not a shallow human, but I like to be presentable, and if I'm with someone, I would like them to care about being presentable in a business environment also. After about a week of chatting online, we agreed to meet. We met at a restaurant downtown, which was really far from where I lived. When I got there, I noticed him standing at the door. We sat down to eat, and the evening went great. At the end of the date, we said bye, and I got into my car and began to drive away. I realized right away that he was following me. Because of the distance to my house, I wasn't immediately scared, because it's a big city. Maybe he'll turn off the freeway. He didn't. My exit was coming up, and I decided not to take it. I kept driving. I circled the entire city on the freeway, and he stayed right behind me. When I just finished college, I was living in a 1-bedroom townhouse split. I met a guy on Plenty of Fish, and at that time I wasn't exactly smart about my online digital footprint. Not like I've really changed, but at least now I'm not as ridiculous. Anyways, he seemed like a decent guy, and he was really good looking. He said he had a good job, nice teeth, don't judge me, and looked like he cared about his personal health. All things I would typically look for in a guy. I'm not a shallow human, but I like to be presentable, and if I'm with someone, I would like them to care about being presentable in a business environment also. After about a week of chatting online, we agreed to meet. We met at a restaurant downtown, which was really far from where I lived. When I got there, I noticed him standing at the door. We sat down to eat, and the evening went great. At the end of the date, we said bye, and I got into my car and began to drive away. I realized right away that he was following me. Because of the distance to my house, I wasn't immediately scared, because it's a big city. Maybe he'll turn off the freeway. He didn't. My exit was coming up, and I decided not to take it. I kept driving. I circled the entire city on the freeway, and he stayed right behind me. I was starting to panic a bit, so I decided to go to my friend's house instead of mine, and when I pulled off the exit, I noticed he didn't. So I had a little bit of a moment to breathe and decided, okay, screw it, I'll just go home. I took the off-ramp back onto the freeway and began going back to my exit. I got home and showered and was getting ready for bed, and I started feeling dumb because, was that really him? Am I overreacting? Do I just ask him if he was following me? Just a number of things were racing through my overactive imagination, or so I thought. I decided I was going to message him and just say, "Had a good time, good night." And when I started typing, all of a sudden a message came through my phone of a picture of my car outside my house. I nearly died. My heart jumped out of my chest and I started shaking. I didn't know what to say, and he texted me and said, "I didn't know you lived across the street from me. I've met my neighbors, and not once have I ever met him." There was a huge apartment complex, catty-corner to the townhouse, so maybe that's where he lived. I don't know. I popped up and went to look outside, and there he was, just standing there, outside like he was waiting for me. I opened the door, and he asked if he could come in, and if I still wanted to hang out. I told him I was exhausted and I'd rather just crash out, as that had been a long day. The next morning, I woke up to go to work, and my windshield had been smashed. My car was keyed, my back two tires were slashed. And as I was noticing the damage to my vehicle, the guy comes out of his car with 2 coffees and is like, "Oh, I thought I'd surprise you with a morning coffee." So again, I'm freaked out. I called the cops and reported the damage to my vehicle. This guy offered to drive me, and something in my gut was like, don't get in that car. So I called my boss, told him the situation, and explained I wasn't going to be there until after the police came. This guy just hung out the whole time, by the way. When the police finally got there, this guy was acting really suspicious. He walked away and was hiding on the other side of his car. I filed the report, and the police basically said, "Hope you have insurance," and were on their way to leave. They pulled around the corner, and all I heard was the siren on the cops' lights turn on. And the cops scream, "Freeze, put your hands in the air and get down on your knees." I look, and the cops got his gun drawn on this guy, and the dude's on the ground getting arrested. I spoke with the cop after he got into the back, and he explained that he was wanted for stalking, breach of probation, assault with a deadly weapon, fraud, and aggravated sexual assault. I was shook. It took me a couple of days to get over the hypothetical situations that could have happened. About a week later, I was on my way out the door to work, and guess who was sitting in my driveway? We live in Canada, so essentially you're released on conditions until you go to jail. I told him I was late for work, but that I'd call him when I was done. I never went to work that day. I went and found a new apartment in another area of the city. I also changed my phone number and hired my friend's husband and his friends to go pack my apartment up and move it to their place for a month, and then move it to my new place because I was so scared this dude would follow them while moving. So that's my horror story of the first time I used Plenty of Fish.
So, a couple things I'd like to be preposed before getting into the story. I lived in one house my whole childhood. On the surface, it looked like the stereotypical child-friendly neighborhood next to a small park. This was very much not the case, however. When I was maybe 5 or 7, young but in school, 2 assholes attempted to kidnap many kids walking home from school around the park. They were never caught, and the same white van was confirmed to be around the area many years later after a kid reported just barely escaping a kidnapping. As I got older, I realized more and more how not super kid-friendly this neighborhood was. Sketchy neighbors, fights breaking out into the street causing cops to be called often, gang members who likely just broke shit and did drugs, made the back paths through the dense neighborhoods and woods their home. They were such a problem that the police had to be called so often that they blocked off those back trails in an attempt to make them leave. The kidnapping incident made tiny me one paranoid motherfucker. Probably watching shows like Criminal Minds and Law and Order from a young age likely didn't help this too. This was probably for the best because just as I try to be cautious and keep to myself, crazy shit just keeps happening around me. One of the scariest things that ever happened to me when I was much older, probably 17 or so, I would get home from high school at like 2:15 or so, since I lived maybe 5 minutes drive away from the school. My parents, however, didn't get home till 7 or 8 o'clock at night most days, meaning I had the house to myself for many hours each day. I religiously locked the front door, garage, and back door anytime I'm home alone. This would piss my parents off since they would have to rummage for their keys in the dark, unless it was the middle of the summer where I live. It gets dark way before they get home, especially during the dead of winter, before they could get into their own damn house. I understood where their frustration was, but leaving the door unlocked made me so anxious that I spent the home time with a pit in my stomach. I am a small and probably easily pick-upable person, and at the time I owned no real way of self-defense aside from a knife in the kitchen. I was positive that if someone wanted to kidnap or kill me, or whatever, all they had to do was get in and I'd be defenseless. The only thing keeping me safe was that locked door. One last thing to note is that at my mother's house we had 2 dogs, both corgis, and they would bark at anything that moved in front of our house, often long before anyone would see the person or car go past the house. On this day, I got home and didn't lock the door. The day before I got ripped a new one for forgetting to unlock it before a parent figure got home. Immediately after I get home, I go straight to the main computer to start my homework and watch YouTube and shit. From this spot, you can turn 90 to the left and stare straight out at the front door, and the back door is like a foot away from you on the right. Right next to the front door was the garage door. Due to the small kitchen, we had basically all the food and stuff was in the garage. It doesn't matter what I went in there for, but as I closed the garage door behind me, I had this overwhelming feeling that I needed to lock the front door. It wasn't the usual anxiety, but an overwhelming feeling of pure dread. I locked the door without even a second thought and attempted to go on with my business. Moments later, the good fluffy friends needed to go outside. We have a reasonably large backyard, so once they are outside, they'll spend a while out there playing and sniffing the same tree for 15 to 20 minutes. On theme with the other coincidences, I had paused the video I was watching to get up and do something. I don't really remember what it was anymore. The dogs were still outside, and because of that, they didn't bark at whoever had walked up to my front door and gently knocked on it. No way I would have heard it unless the house was completely silent, which, conveniently enough, it was. This obviously got my attention and I froze. I couldn't believe what I had saw next. The doorknob was obviously being shook as they attempted to open the door. After maybe 30 seconds, the shaking stopped and never started again. I owned a car that was parked outside of my house. I feel like that means it was very obvious someone was home. I don't know if they thought maybe no one was home, knocked to see if they heard any noise inside, then tried the door once they thought the coast was clear, or if they were just after me or stupid or crazy. I just about pissed myself. As quietly as I could, I made my dogs come in. The back gate's door could easily be opened, and I was sure they would try to come in that way. I locked the back door, put a piece of wood behind the sliding door, closed the blinds, and held the dogs like these 15-25 pound dogs were going to protect me from everything. After some time, I attempted to return to my business, and for some stupid reason, didn't call the police or even my parents. I just told them when they got home from work that day. I never heard any shit for keeping the door locked after that. Now I've moved out into my own flat, and I still can't shake the dread of wondering what would have happened if I didn't lock that door, and the dogs didn't want to go out at that moment. If they were inside the house, they would have barked up a storm, covering up the sound of the knocking and knob moving, and I never would have a clue what actually happened. I still lock the front door no matter what to this day. Some other crazy shit has happened in that neighborhood. But that'll be stories for another day. This post is already long as hell, so creepy asshole who tried to break into my house, let's not meet again.
My best friend and I are both females and 18 years old, but quite short and young-looking. I'll call her Rose. We were walking down a very quiet street in Sydney, a little bit lost. I'm usually very alert when in public places, being a young woman. We were talking about albums and music, and a man jogged past us. He was looking at us, and I made eye contact with him the whole time before he stopped about 10 meters up. He looked to be late 30s. I already got a bad feeling about things, and I signaled that to Rose. He stopped us and asked if we had any music suggestions. Awkwardly, we said no, and he said, "But you were talking about albums." Keep in mind he had earphones in as he jogged past us, and was only near us for a few seconds. Does this mean he was following us without us realizing? We tried to turn the conversation down every time we spoke, but he began to follow us. Rose is shorter and younger than me, and it shows. His questions were more directed at her, and I immediately started to answer them before she could. He got mad at me and began to try and talk some more to Rose. He would comment on the clothes she was wearing, and I would do whatever I could to intervene. Rose made me aware of the swastika tattoo on his arm. I know that it is also a symbol of peace, but this man seemed anything but peaceful. He continued following us wherever we would go, despite us being in a very public area of the city now. It got to the stage where I grabbed Rose's hand and walked onto a busy road, pulling her across, narrowly avoiding cars. He still followed us. We then started walking down some hill, with no idea where we were. He stopped and asked why we were going that way, and we said there was a place we wanted to visit. With that, he turned around and jogged away. We still don't know what his intentions were. We always felt safe in this city during the day, but now things feel different.
When I was 13, I broke my leg in a nasty bicycle accident. I ended up in a plaster cast from my hip to my ankle for 8 weeks. As it was coming up to Christmas, my younger brother wanted to go to the theater to see the Christmas show. I was 13, moody, and accompanied by a bright pink cast everywhere I went. I was not feeling it. My dad, never one for going to the theater, offered to take me to Pizza Hut instead. It was a rare opportunity to spend time with my dad, who was often working very long hours. He worked as a police officer, which at the time I didn't really take an interest in what he did. We had a great evening at Pizza Hut, and we got back into the car to go home with full bellies and some leftover pizza. I remember babbling away to my dad as I had been the whole night, and throughout I had my dad's undivided attention. After a while, I noticed he wasn't really responding anymore. We were fairly near home, but still on main roads before we turned off toward our housing estate. At first, I thought he'd just lost interest, but I glanced across and noticed he was permanently looking in the rearview mirror. I asked him what was up, and he said, "The car behind us has followed us all the way from Pizza Hut." I glanced behind and commented that we were still on main roads. I couldn't see that this was an unusual route for this guy to take. He said, "I need to see whether he is. I don't want to lead this guy to our house." I rolled my eyes. My dad was always paranoid about this stuff like that. We couldn't even tell friends we were going on holiday because he was convinced the house would be broken into while we were away. We were coming up to a residential area before ours that I knew from doing a newspaper round. I suggested the street coming up on the left as it looped around in a horseshoe shape through a housing estate and brings you back out on the same main road we were on, just further up. Nobody would take this road to come out onto the main road again. My dad turned off, and so did the car. I would never forget that feeling, that sinking feeling as I watched the car sharply turn behind ours. The car placed its full beams on. I let out a gasp and looked to my dad. He'd gone into work mode. He had completely shut me out. He accelerated down the street, and as we come to the main road, I saw there were many cars still on it. He pulled straight out, meeting the car coming on the main road, needing to brake sharply, and held down their horn at us. I kept my eyes on the main road ahead, breathing deeply, as my dad weaved in and out of lanes. A part of me was completely terrified. and a part of me was still convinced this was not really happening, that he had exaggerated or mistaken this. He wasn't really following us. I dared to look in the side mirror and I saw it was a different car behind us. I felt myself relax a little. We turned left at the coming roundabout, giving very little room to anyone, and a few moments of holding my breath thinking we were going to hear the sound of metal on metal. The street we had turned onto was slightly quieter than the road previous. I slowly glanced into the side mirror. It was still a different car behind us. I sighed relief and thought this had really been my dad's imagination. Suddenly, the rearview mirror became completely illuminated again, and I awkwardly turned in my seat to see a car pull out sharply from behind the car behind us and pull in quickly behind ours again. I looked to my dad again. He grabbed his phone from his pocket and told me to call someone in particular in his phone and put it on speaker. My hands were shaking. I could barely press the buttons. A cheerful voice answered, and before he could say anything else, my dad quickly summarized what had happened. There was a pause, and I could hear voices speaking in the background, radios beeping, and answering through radios. My dad barked at me to keep naming the streets we were on to the guy on the phone as my dad randomly turned down streets, trying to keep to main roads. I'm randomly calling names and trying to remember to say the direction we were heading. The car was so close behind us and completely blinding any view in that direction. All I could think was, please don't hit us. If we crash, I cannot run. What the hell can I do? My leg had only just been plastered. I knew I stood no chance. I suddenly wondered if they were getting close enough to take a shot at us. This for me was unthinkable. It was in England. That is not the norm. Why the hell would someone want to shoot us? We continued to weave down the streets in random turns as I was tossed around the front seat, clutching onto the mobile in my trembling hands. The voice on the phone shouted, "Turn into the Tesco car park that's coming up on the left. We have 3 response vehicles coming from the other direction." My dad sharply turned into the car park, skipping the red light. I shut my eyes, again, waiting for the sound of metal on metal. As we swung into the empty park, the car behind us in close pursuit, blue lights surrounded our car from what felt like all directions. The sound of sirens was deafening. My dad got straight out of the car and ran behind the car. I screamed, still thinking someone could have had a gun, and tried to look over my shoulder to see when my door swung open and a police officer was crouching into the car to help get me out. My arms were completely jelly. I could not even use the crutches to help me stand. Another police officer came in between them. They helped me as I hopped to the back of the police car. They were kind and tried to distract me as I was trying to see what was going on and where my dad was. I couldn't really see from my angle, and I also couldn't turn properly due to my leg. They did their best to reassure me, and one had clearly just been through the nearby McDonald's drive-thru, offered me his tea. I just sobbed, begging them to tell me what was going on. My dad, after some time, came over to the car and told them to take me home. He had checked and my mom was back home with my brother. As the police car turned around in the car park back towards the entrance, we could see the police surrounding the vehicle, and 3 men in what looked to be their late 20s were handcuffed, leaning over the car, whilst a sniffer dog and 2 police officers were taking things out of the car, one of which was a baseball bat. When my dad got home later that night, I asked him what it was about, who the hell were those men, and why were they following us. He was very reluctant to tell me anything. He did admit it was because of him that they were following us. He explained that he was in a drugs team that dealt with how, I understand this as an adult, the interception of large shipments of drugs that were being transferred across the country, and sometimes people lost a lot of money when they were caught. I just stared at him. I had no idea what to say. He just shrugged and said, sometimes Sometimes people get upset about that. Dear the drug lords whom my father took your drugs or money from, I'd rather not meet.
I'm a young petite female and have a new EV. I haven't installed my charger yet, so I usually charge every night or every other night because I drive long distances. I have 2 spots I go, the mall or Walmart. Tonight I decided to go to Walmart since it is closer to my house. I noticed about 2 minutes after I got back in my car that a van pulled over. The guy inside attempted to talk to me, but he looked like a creep, so I decided not to open my window. I noticed he didn't get out and he didn't have anyone else with him. I felt observed and caught him staring at me a few times. I started to get scared when it had been over 30 minutes and my car was at 85% done. The EVgo chargers have a screen displaying the charge left, and when he noticed my car was almost done, he started moving more and even opened his door. He was looking at the screen, then directly at me. At this moment I was terrified. I had looked over my car for anything that could be used as a weapon, and I had nothing. I was waiting for anyone to park near me and unplug then, but nobody was parking near me or next to me. I didn't know what to do. I started to dial 911 because I honestly feared for my safety. When he noticed that, he quickly turned around and got out of the car. When I saw him walk inside of Walmart, I rushed out and left ASAP before he walked out. I knew I had about 5 minutes since the doors are one way due to COVID, and he would have to go around through the cashiers. When I got home, I watched the full recording of my cameras. It gave me the chills when I saw him staring straight at me from his window. You could tell he was up to no good, and please, let's not meet again.
A few months ago, I moved into a new city in France for my studies. Since it's an exchange and I won't stay long, I took a room in a public student residence. I met that guy in the elevator. After running into him a few times, he asked for my number, which I gave him because he was nice and seemed to be very lonely since he lives far away from his home country. I instantly regretted this. He started texting me all the time. At first, I was not against writing or maybe hanging out, but he became very intrusive, texting me again when I didn't answer after an hour on several apps. I eventually told him to stop, which he didn't, and then ghosted him. I felt very uncomfortable in my residence, but didn't run into him again and forgot about him until a few weeks ago. I was walking in the street late in the afternoon. Since it's winter and we had a curfew because of COVID-19, it was already night and nobody was in the street. I walked past him, wasn't sure if recognized him since it was dark, but kept walking because I didn't want to confront him in case it was him. He was very creepy. He started yelling my name a lot and didn't give up. I got scared, kept walking away, and put on my music louder. I know it's mean, but his messages were too intrusive and creepy, so I didn't want to have anything to do with him. Moreover, I told him to stop texting me, but he didn't. I just thought if I didn't react to him yelling my name, he would think that he called the wrong person and just stop. Well, I was wrong. He followed me home. We live at the same place, so him walking in the same direction is maybe not that weird. Only, when I saw him, he was walking away from the residence. I didn't turn back right away. I could feel somebody behind me, but thought that I was being paranoid. I turned back in front of the residence, because there was a guardian watching in case anything got wrong. I said to him that I could feel somebody following me and asked innocently if he was. He denied and aggressively made me reproach about me not returning his texts and calls. I politely said that he was being intrusive and went into the residence. The guy didn't even go inside the residence, he just continued to walk in the street, which means that he followed me and wasn't going home. I didn't see him again yet. I moved away from the residence just the time of the lockdown, and I'm very scared to go back there in January for my finals. He was aggressive, so I don't know what he would have done if the guardian wasn't there.
So this happened about 3 years ago. I worked at a venue which is part bar, part bistro, and part accommodation. I'm female and I tend to stand out in a crowd. I've got sleeve tattoos down both arms and I'm a bigger woman. I was dating a girl who worked at the same bar. She'd had several run-ins with the creepy guy who couldn't accept that she wasn't interested in him. Eventually he found out she was seeing me. Because I was manager, I sometimes had to work even on my days off if someone calls in sick and there's nobody else. This really began one such night. I got called in on my day off. Nobody else could cover. So I go to work and I'm in a bad mood. I'm a real bitch when I'm in a bad mood. So I'm quick with the customers, trying to speak as little as necessary, and waiting out the clock when he comes in. He asks for a beer. I get him a bottle. He wants a glass. I slam it down on the bar. He says something along the lines of, "You need to ask if there's anything else." I tell him not to push it. He tells me that I need to talk to him, it's customer service, etc. I crack it. I yell at him that I don't have to do anything other than give him his drink and take his money, and that really I don't even need to do that. I storm off into the bistro and find Joe. I tell him the weirdo is making me really angry. Joe knows me. He knows my temper, and has been on the receiving end enough times, both before and since this, that he wouldn't wish it on anyone else. He makes sure I'm not going to lose my shit altogether, then swaps with me. He'd later tell me that the creep asked where the girl with the tattoos and the big butt went. Now normally bistro people are more demanding than bar people, and you need to display a level of professionalism or niceness not needed in the bar. So after 3 hours of suppressing my rage and putting on a happy face, I'm like a powder keg. Joe offers to get a drink with me. We got to my car and it's been keyed. Fat dyke. I'm so fucking furious. Even remembering this, I can feel myself getting angry. Joe had to literally hold me back from going looking for this guy, and I was shaking in his arms. I didn't have much money, the car cost most of my savings, and I can't afford to get it fixed anytime soon. Joe stays with me for a while, just sitting in my car, talking. I calm down from my murderous rage to simply fuming. I don't see him for a while, but things keep happening to my car. Wipers pushed up, rubbish on the screen, etc. Eventually, I left that job and got the car fixed. I ended up dating Joe not long after this.
There's a homeless man who runs around the streets of Oak Lawn, Illinois. Not really sure what his full story is, but everyone knows him. Apparently he's not actually homeless, but is just mentally unstable and actually has a good amount of money. He's always walking around in a brown trench coat, holding grocery bags and screaming random nonsense at the cars passing. He's been nicknamed Birdman. You can probably look him up, to be honest. It's because of his appearance and the way he presents himself. He has a beak-like nose and is bald on top but long hair on the sides. Apparently he's harmless, but one night I pulled up to a bar to meet 2 of my girls. I noticed he was close by. I didn't think anything of it. I got out of my car and walked up to them. They were outside smoking a cig, when one of them tells me, "Hey, that dude is staring at us." He walked behind a tree next to the parking lot. At the far end where it was dark, he was half standing behind the tree, and like she said, just staring us down, with his head down and his eyes up at us in a super eerie way. We were out there for 5 minutes before she decides to go inside because she's freaked out. He was still standing there, so I go in and have a drink. About 10 minutes later, I check to see if he's there, and he is still standing there, still staring at the building like he wants to burn it down or something. He literally stood there for a good 30 minutes, just staring, before he finally ran off to do whatever. I don't know how harmless he is. Don't know about you, but I don't trust anyone who doesn't have the rocks in their brain in order. It seemed like he was waiting for one of us to come back out.